and we'll move on from there. We had to find the z-score. Well, I know we did this in class. We'll just do it again. That has 10.75% of the distribution to the right. So graph this. Just put your z-score, standard normal curve. We have no x values right now. We're going to find the cutoffs in a little bit. We're just looking for your z-score right now. I want 10.75%, I'm going to move my decimal, to be to the right of this cutoff. Is my z-score going to be positive or negative? It's going to be positive. Somewhere over here is 10% of my curve. Somewhere, right? So my z-score is going to be positive. Two ways to look this up. I can only look up my area to the left. So I need to say 1 minus this. And we discussed the inverse norm. Inverse norm, you can put this right in here. And your mean has to be 0, your standard deviation 1. If you have the 83s, make sure you give me an extra parentheses, comma, and you'll find your corresponding z-score. Everybody remember doing this? We said we could also look it up in your table if you wanted to. So if you did 1 minus, Aaron, if you did 1 minus 1.1075, and you looked at 0.8925 in the table, in this part of your table, and the 8 point, you know it's positive, so you'd be looking on the positive side, not the negative. If you look this up, you should be able to find it, or something close to it, to pull out your z-score. Yes, I do. Okay, hold on. Also, did you read your Jacqueline period home with Mrs. Cooper? Oh, yeah, I did. She did. She did. 335. 336. Okay, you come at the end of the period, will you still be there? Okay, thank you. 335, 336. So at the end of the period, there was 3 to count. Okay, now, what's another way you can look up this z-score? We did the 1 minus, we looked in your table, we did the inverse norm. What's another way to look up the same z-score? Nope, there's no formula. We looked on the chart. We did the 1 minus. We looked in your chart. We found it in your chart. Calculator inverse norm. We did calculator inverse norm. What? No, you don't ask me. What can I do this? Yeah, but what's the difference between this and this? What's that going to give me? That's going to give me the negative. It's going to give me the wrong answer, but the right number. So that's going to give me the negative of this. And because it's the same area on both sides of the curve, right? So then can I just take that z-score and make it positive because I know it has to be positive? Yes? Yes?
So whenever it says to the right, we just automatically 1 minus.
1 minus, because it looks up your area to the left. However, because you're symmetric about the mean, you could look up the negative of it. And once you look up the negative of it, then you just turn it into a positive number. So if I look this up and I get this is the same as if I get this. This is my negative 1.24. I just say, oh, it's a positive 1.24. It has to be positive. My sketch tells me it has to be positive. But your curve has symmetry. Yes. Okay, did you look up in your calculator the inverse norm? Okay. So let's backtrack a minute. Were you here Tuesday? Okay, so you can look up on your table. The inverse norm is the best one in the calculator to know how to put under your belt. So let's get you working on that calculator. Now, watch. And I need everybody to be able to do this. We did this one, so let's go to, all right, let's do this one. Let's do this one again. Find a z-score that has 96.16%. That's real close to the whole area. In its distribution to the right of it. Now remember, half of this is 50%, half of this is 50%. I want to shade to the right. I want to shade to the right. I want 96% of my curve to be shaded to the right. Am I going to have a negative or a positive z-score? A negative z-score, way over here, right? Because doesn't this have to be 96.16%? Try it one. So, we want this little z-score here. But I only look up my area to the left. So this little area is 1 minus this guy. Now, it's got the flip side of this. If I look that up, I get this guy over here, which is my positive, but I know in my heart and in my brain that it's got to be on the negative side. So all I got to do is put a negative in it. So your inverse norm, if you do this first, gives you your area to the left, and you'll get a negative z-score for this. Or, if you put this in, this is why your sketch is so helpful. If you put this in, you get your positive z-score, but you know it has to be the negative. Make sense? So, looking up in your table, 96.16, do you find that exactly? 96.16? I find it 96.16 exactly. So that's 177. And I would have to be on the negative side. Okay? Are we good with this? All right. Little twist to this. I could do without the whistling, guys. A little twist to this. Okay. We're going to find a z-score that has 95% of the area under the curve between two z-scores. Now, when we do this, the z-scores have to be the positive and negative of each other. It can't be two different z-scores or we won't be able to find it.
Just find the positive and negative.
Well, I don't know. Let's see. 95% has to stay here. This z-score and this z-score has the same number. This one has a negative, this one has a positive. So think about this for a second. Every time you look up your area, it's area to the left. So if I want to look up this z-score, I need to know what this area is.
Basically, it's the left and right, basically, right?
Well, you always look up your area to the left.
Isn't this actually to the left or the right?
You can do either left or the right. But no, I need 95% to be in between them. Think about it. What's the area altogether? 100. If this is 95%, what's the area in this piece right here? 2.5. How did you get 2.5?
It's symmetrical to the other side, to be another 2.5.
Because if this adds up to 100, these two pieces have to add up to 5%. So 5%. Like the mommy and Dan said, this is symmetric. They have to share this evenly. So each one of these gets 2.5. So now, all I have to do is look up the inverse norm of, I'll move my decimal, 0.025. Whatever the negative is, I also have the positive. Now, your calculator can also do this calculation for you. If you go to inverse norm, you say, I have to do 1 minus 0.95 parentheses divide by 2. It'll do this for you. However, you need to make sure that you have this separate set of parentheses in here, because you needed to do this subtract before you do a divide.
Okay, so what do we put in the inverse norm?
You have two choices. You can do it yourself and put in the 0.025, or you can put it in like this. You can let the calculator calculate it. But the problem is, okay, your inverse norm here has no parentheses, so you only have to do this. In your yellow calculators, you just have to do this. In your black calculators, you're going to have a separate set of parentheses. You have to have a lot of parentheses in the black calculators.
So divided by 2 not multiplied by 2.
Divided by 2, because you want to take what's left and divide it by 2, because you only want this piece.
Can you explain this? Like, because when you go to inverse norms,
Yes.
it actually puts that in there. It says like area 0.
Yeah, no, these are your standard deviations and your mean. You want that. You want to say this. 1 minus 0.95 divided by 2.
And then just press this.
You would get
Negative 1.96.
So if this is negative 1.96, what's the z-score?
Positive.
So you're going to find 95% of your data between negative 1.96 and positive 1.96. And do you remember back to your empirical rule? Plus or minus 2 is 95% of your data. We just rounded. They just rounded. Plus or minus 2, remember plus or minus 1, 68. Plus or minus 2, 95. So doesn't that make sense? This all does make sense if you let it. But what I find you have to do is kind of layer everything that you're learning. Layer your graphs on top of each other. Think about where your areas are. Layer all the things that you know. And you'll be able to come out with this. Okay, now, another little tricky piece of information is finding the z-score that corresponds to a percentile. It's the same as what we just did, but they just said percentile instead of area to the left. Now, in your curve, your area is measured from the left to the right, right? That's how we accumulate. This is where your percentiles, your rankings come from. So from 0, here's the 50, to the approximately 100. Okay? Now, if I want a percentile of 5, this says I want the 5% cutoff. I'm reading left to right.
0.05.
So here, I want this to be 0.05. Same thing that we just did, looking up your z-score, they just put a percentile in front of it. So if I want the lower 5% of my curve, I find that z-score. Say that again?
The negative side?
Yeah, you want the negative side. Up to here, this is your 50 percentile, isn't it?
Yeah.
So where would you find your 5? Way on the bottom there. You have to read left to right. Where would you find your 50? At the 0. So what's your z-score? 0. Where would you find your 90? Over here, yeah. Because it's all this, 90. You're better than 90% of the curve. 90% of the curve is behind you. So if someone wants the top 10%, this is what they're looking for. Give me the cutoff. That gives me 10% on top. I want to know, and that's what we're working towards. We just have to find the z-scores before we can find the x values. And this is what people look at.
When you do that, the 90, you do 0.90 in calculator?
Yes. Inverse norm, 0.90. Inverse norm, these are really nice, 0.05. Inverse norm, in case you didn't catch the 0, 0.50. Your area is to the left, and your percentile reads from the left to the right. So,
Same thing as you said.
yeah, so just give this a try. You guys are blankly staring at me. Give it a try.
It's not different.
Okay, so everybody do these. 2 minutes, do those. So when I'm looking for 10% of my curve, am I looking for a negative z-score or a positive z-score? Negative. It's 10%. This is the 50% mark. This is 10%. So on inverse norm, 0.10. So you should come out with a z-score of negative 1.28. Make sense? Makes sense. If you're looking for a 20%, am I a negative or a positive z-score? Negative. I'm less than 50%. So somewhere, this is 20%. So I inverse norm 0.20, and I get negative 0.84. Am I getting closer to the 50%? Do you see it moving closer to the 50%? If I'm looking for 99, that's going to be a really, really high one up here, isn't it? Because 99% of my curve has to be to the left. So I do an inverse norm, and I get a positive 2.33. Can everybody do this? What's that? I outdid myself. I was hoping you guys would outdo yourselves.
You know I got the ladies.
Yes, that's what I was hoping for. Okay, in the back of the book and hand it to me. I want to see sketches. Yes.
It would be like a 64 tribute.
I know. Do you know how that breaks my heart as well? There were 3 of you
Oh,
that had a 64 or a 63.
yeah, bro. I wanted to buy